Colonel Doug Macgregor, I think he's got a heart. That didn't necessarily show it in the great tank battle of 73 Easting, for which about which he's written a book, and for which he was highly decorated, Bronze Star with the V for personal valor. Colonel Macgregor is one of the leading iconoclastic thinkers of our time. I mean, if anybody has thought deeply and seriously about what transformation really means, it's probably Doug Macgregor. Breaking the Phalanx, Transformation Under Fire, just two of the books he's written that really look at transformation in the most unique and serious ways that I'm aware of. So we're really honored to have this Army veteran who doesn't just limit his observations to his former service, who's a graduate of the military academy, 76, I think, right? But has a truly world view of what ails defense and has been saying it for some time. And so we look forward to hearing his views on the current situation and what to do about it. And he has not given me a commission for this plug, nor has the Naval Institute, by the way, which is publishing this, Naval Institute Press. And they, of course, together with AFCEA, are our co-hosts, and I think are doing a marvelous job. Doug, over to you.
Well, just think for a minute. It's a book about an Army battle that only the Naval Institute Press would publish. So, it's worth reading. Listen, I'm very happy to be here today. I'm always happy to leave the Beltway. As soon as you drive outside the Beltway, people are nice to you. They smile at you. They wave at you. They're friendly to you. And there's no original thought inside the Beltway. I'm sure you're aware of that. There's a reason for that. When I was assigned in the War Plans Division of the Army Staff in 1994, one of my duties was very early in the morning to go downstairs in the basement of the Pentagon and flip a switch. This switch controlled giant microwave emitters. Now, the microwave emitters are unknown to you, but in truth, you've seen these so-called sound barriers along 495 and 66. Those are really microwave emitters. We turn them on in the morning. That turns your brain to mush. So by the time that you arrive at the Pentagon, you're incapable of any sort of original thought. We turn those things off at noon so that you can find your way home again. So that's one of the principal problems that we confront. Now, in all seriousness, the basis for my brief remarks today is an article that I wrote that is posted at foreignpolicy.com. It's called Lean, Mean Fighting Machine, Declare Victory and Go Home, How to Deal with Defense. And I recommend it to you. Now, I know some of you have read it because I've gotten your hate mail. But for those of you that haven't read it yet, you really need to look at it because it's the only thing I've seen thus far that actually systematically goes through the general purpose force structure and cuts both force structure and personnel, hence the hate mail, as you can imagine. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Now, before I go into the three areas I want to discuss, I want to reinforce what Dr. Zackheim said at the very beginning. I actually anticipate a much more profound downturn in the economy than I think most people do. I don't personally see any evidence for a recovery, and I think in the aftermath of the next presidential election, strangely enough, we're going to see another fiscal crisis, another bubble burst, and I think it will be hell to pay, to put it bluntly, economically inside the United States. Now, inevitably, somebody in the audience says, well, who the hell are you? You know, you're not an economist. Who are you to say this? Well, John Kenneth Galbraith, an economist, once said, economists exist to make astrologers look professional and competent. So, I am completely at ease predicting disaster. And the point is very simple. That is those of us in the military establishment, the people that lead the military establishment, are going to have to work closely with the civilian leadership to find ways to make significant reductions in defense, because you know that long before someone attacks the Ponzi scheme that we have in Washington, D.C., known as Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, they're going to go after defense. We absolutely have to deal with it. And it's going to be uncomfortable for many, many people because it's going to compel change. And that's really one of the themes. I think this is an opportunity, frankly, to make virtue of necessity, to reshape the force, to move in new directions. I don't see a major conflict between great scientific industrial powers for at least 10 to 15 years. Could be wrong, been wrong once or twice before, but I think it's unlikely. It's unlikely because the rest of the world, ladies and gentlemen, is in terrible condition. I know that sounds strange, but they really are. China, which is referred to as this rising power, there is incidentally a new China threat industry inside the Beltway that's developing very, very rapidly. That threat industry, I think, is misleading for the simple reason that there are 800 million people inside China who live in abject poverty and about 400 million who live very much like you. This is not a new development in the history of China. Remember that every Chinese dynasty has existed longer than the United States has been in existence. The Chinese have been through these booms and busts before. They've got serious economic dislocations. But there's another piece of news. They've also been very foolish in their public behavior, their public diplomacy, particularly in Asia. Not so much with us, contrary to popular belief, but in Asia. And what is now emerging in Northeast Asia is going to change the strategic equation. That's not the United States. That's an emerging Korean-Japanese military alliance. Something which lots of people thought was impossible, which is now beginning to take on very real dimensions. Those two states, in terms of scientific industrial power, are enormous, absolutely dramatic and decisive in their capability to reshape Northeast Asia. In addition to that, the Chinese have managed to make enemies virtually all the way around them. Needless to say, the Indians harbor no illusions about China, neither do the Vietnamese, and clearly the Russians do not. And in those areas, we're going to see conflict in the future. And future conflict, by the way, is not going to resemble what we've seen over the last 10 years. And this is very important for everyone in here to understand. What we've been doing for the last 10 years is not the future. It is very definitely the past. It is a throwback to 19th century colonialism and imperialism. Only this time, in the American context, it is altruistic imperialism. We come in peace to help you, kill hundreds of thousands of you, incarcerate hundreds of thousands of you, destroy your economy, and then reshape your nation to suit our interests. This sort of altruistic imperialism has been a disaster. It did not start in Afghanistan or Iraq. It actually began in earnest in the aftermath of Desert Storm, when our favorite ambassador to the United Nations, who became Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, said, "Well, General Powell, you keep talking about this wonderful military. Why won't you use it everywhere?" And we began using it, and using it, and using it, and using it. We've now just about worn it out. And by the way, we have not been fighting robust adversaries or enemies who can actually test our capabilities. This is the other great secret kept from the American people. Dov Zakheim told me not to say this, but I'm going to say it. For the last 10 years, we have been involved in the military equivalent of clubbing baby seals. There are no armies, no air forces, no air defenses, no navies, no nothing. And I have personally fought and killed Arabs. And the SEALs that I killed were at least well equipped and organized in '91. The ones that we've been clubbing have been pathetic. Afghanistan is worse. And it has cost us $1.6 trillion, if you believe Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize winner. And it's going to cost us a lot more in the future, as has been pointed out. This is over. This is in its death throes. The future is going to be different. It's going to be different on two levels. First of all, it's going to be different strategically, because we have no interest that justifies, thank you, we have no interest that justifies, no compelling national strategic interest that justifies the commitment of our forces over the long term to build nations where none exist, to fix fundamentally broken societies that rest on the foundation of dysfunctional cultures. This is going to end. Those of you who are worried about marching into Libya, I have news for you. There is no appetite on the Hill, and there is no appetite in the United States to put a large U.S. ground force into Libya. Nor do I see any appetite in the future, much as Secretary Gates has pointed out recently in some of his public statements. In addition to that, warfare is in fact moving in new and interesting directions, and we've taken essentially a break from that. We need to go back and look at it. We need to appreciate technology, its impact, as well as social factors. In addition to the rest of the world being mired in the equivalent of 1848 revolutions, and by the way, we may see something very similar here in the United States, depending on what happens with our own economy, we are also seeing what began many, many years ago in microcircuitry, directed energy, and a host of other important technologies reach new heights of lethality. Now, to give you a quick impression of lethality, let's stop for a minute and remember that in less than 6 months during World War I, we lost 310,000 casualties, including 110,000 dead. Think about the lethality of that battlefield. We haven't seen anything like that in the last 10 years. But that kind of lethality is going to be magnified in the future, and it's going to change the way we operate. We're going to have to be capable of mobile dispersed operations at sea, in the air, on the ground. There is going to be a critical need for protection that comes in both the form of armor and passive armor capabilities as well as active capabilities. We're going to have strike weapons, and our enemies, our adversaries, our potential opponents are also going to be equipped with strike weapons. The ISR complex that surrounds this globe is going to have a more profound impact than anybody can imagine. What are we going to have to do? What we're going to have to do, as I said before, is make virtue of necessity. Make cuts, but begin to think of future forces as being organized around ISR, strike, maneuver, and sustainment, operating not under single service headquarters and single service chains of command, sometimes with a J in front to make them joint, but in fact integrative command structures, where joint force commanders with 3 stars could be from any service, commanding force capability packages from any service. This is something we've resisted for a very long time, but 2 things are driving us in the direction. One is the lack of funding. It's going to be acute in the years ahead, and the second is going to be the nature of future conflict and crisis. So, what do we cut? What do we harvest? Where do we go? What do we look for? Do we stand back and say, what has been selected over the long run for extinction in the Darwinian sense? Are we going to have mass armies in the future designed to flood other people's countries with riflemen to bring them liberal democracy, which they can't spell or understand? No. We're going to have a smaller, more professional ground force than what we've seen in the past. The Marine Corps and the Army are both going to be subjected to personnel reductions, which is the polite term for significant cuts. And I recommend a 600,000-man ground force. And of course, the first people with hate mail were the Marines. You know, they sent the hate mail instantly. The Army sent a couple of people out to slash my tires, but I caught them before they got to it. You know, the Navy, when they found out I cut 3 carrier battle groups and all their support started sending me viruses through email. The Air Force got off relatively lightly, so they're only engaged in identity theft. But the point is, all of the services are going to be absolutely miserable, but you're going to live in a world dominated increasingly by submarines, unmanned submersibles, unmanned aircraft, the aerospace environment, this complex, this ISR strike maneuver complex from space, from land, from the sea. It's going to change the way we do business. We're not going to be able to concentrate large numbers of forces for long periods of time in cantonment areas. All of these things lead to the kinds of reductions that are outlined in foreignpolicy.com. So I urge you to look at them because, as I